My dad taught me very young at age. He'd always say that don't waste time, because if you do that, one day time's going to waste you. I think the key here is in believing yourself. I think anything and everything can be extremely complex and difficult and or very simple and straightforward. It just depends on the perspective you bring. AI will take away jobs from people who don't know how to use AI. So if you can start incorporating and thinking along those lines, whatever role you're doing.
You're listening to East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast. Welcome to the East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast. Today we have Zohaib Akhtar. Zohaib is a rising business professional with a unique blend of business education and technological expertise. He holds several certifications, including the CMA, the CIA, and CSCA, and has experience in data science and data engineering. Zohaib has a noteworthy professional history, having worked at Blackberry, Mattel, PepsiCo, and currently at Deloitte. He values continuous learning and mentoring others. Outside of his professional pursuits, Zohaib is active in sports, an animated movie enthusiast, and recipient of the IMA's Young Leadership Awards in 2018. It's a pleasure having you on the podcast, Zohaib.
Thank you so much, Azam. It's a pleasure as well, and really grateful for the opportunity to connect with you this morning.
Yep. And I guess we could start off, before getting to the professional aspect, focusing on your starting in Pakistan and then how you journeyed to Canada. Do you mind just giving more details on your relation to Pakistan? Were you brought up in Pakistan or brought up in Canada? Just giving more details on that.
I was born in Karachi. I was about a week old when I was moved out back to Saudi, where my parents were based out of. My mother especially spent a lot of time in terms of giving me education in reference to reading and writing Urdu, for example, the history of Pakistan and so forth. Both parents are fairly patriotic. We'd also go back for at least the summer holidays, if not more frequently. There was obviously that connection, and then obviously I still have relatives over there back home. We stay connected almost on a, I would say, day-to-day basis.
Okay, and when did you go to, was it like during your high school period, university, or was it like even younger to Canada?
Yeah, it was definitely in my middle school. That's when I moved here, way before university.
Yeah, it's the same for me as well. So how did you find the transition from Pakistan or / Saudi to middle school? Because I know middle school, at least for me, was very challenging in terms of the social aspect and whatnot.
I'd say it was the same experience as I'm being frank with you. Thankfully, Canada, I would say it's a very polite country. And my experience was very unique compared to what people see today. So I still remember when I moved into the middle school, there was about 8 people who were non-Caucasian. We were just, you could count us on the fingers, very far and few. But again, we had a very decent experience growing up in school. Our teachers, I would say classmates, everybody was very welcoming. So it was quite good in that sense. Another benefit I guess I had was because I stayed out of Pakistan and being in Saudi, my first years were spent at an American school there. What turned out to happen was moving here wasn't quite a big transition, just because you had the same education school-wise. You had a very similar fashion, I would say, an approach from teachers, the way they taught you and the way the school system was set up. So it wasn't that big a transition. But naturally, being away from Pakistan, being away from Saudi for that matter, was quite something. I also find something interesting that people in Pakistan versus people that I see here in Canada, I often find that the Pakistani background people are in fact more Pakistani than the people who stayed back in Pakistan. And I think that tends to happen because as you move away from your motherland, you do want to stay somehow connected with the roots. You want to stay connected to the culture, the traditions. So I think people try and make a bigger effort on doing so here than obviously people who stay in Pakistan.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, it's a lot harder to just like to maintain it sometimes, and then just being able to, I think so you're more self-aware. I guess that's what happens.
Exactly. Plus, I always tell people that no matter where you go, you're always going to be a representation of your background. I would say the upbringing you've had at home, your family, anything that you've been connected with. So you'll always be representing that. And I think that then obviously adds a little bit more weight in reference to the actions you're going to plan and take. Yeah, I think it worked out well for us.
Right. And when you moved into high school, did you know like what you were interested in? How did that develop? And when you went to university and decide what major you were doing, what was that process like?
Interestingly enough, when I was growing up, in my high school days especially, and even younger, I was always into computers. Being technical or technically sound was the thing that came to me very naturally. I was really good with numbers and overall with education as well. So I'd say in school, I was one of those kids who was always sitting in front of class, always on time, very close to the teachers and the school administration. I also took part in most of the sports and the other student unions and everything. But to answer your question, think of it this way. Being extremely good with computers, everybody thought this is what I'll do. Growing up again, had a dream to become the youngest Bill Gates. That was, you could say, the focus. Yeah. But my dad he's an accountant. I took my dad as a role model. The idea was, although I was good with computers, computers, I kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps. And that's how accounting basically came about. Being frank, it was a subject that I enjoyed, a subject that I found very easy, but a subject that I also found super boring. But I still ended up taking it, and here we are.
And how was the decision in choosing your university upon graduation of high school? What was the process like for that? Once you
Again,
chose it?
where I wanted to go versus where my parents wanted to see me was very different. They were always super supportive. So I wanted to be in the University of Waterloo. They have a very renowned accounting program. So I always thought that that is the place I want to be in. And I still remember I ended up getting selected. And we went out to celebrate. We were having dinner. And once the dinner was done, I told my family I'm not planning to go there. And they were all like, this is what you wanted all along. But the reason why I didn't exactly choose to go there and instead ended up at UFT was because my parents always aspired for me to be, one, going to that school and then being close to home, rather staying at home. So
Yep.
I knew that was something they wanted, although they super supported my decision, or rather my aspiration to go down to University of Waterloo. So I think I wanted to obviously do things that would be more, I would say, in line with what their goals or dreams were. And hence I made that decision. And I think anytime you do things that will make your parents happy, the Almighty is going to find ways to make
Mhm.
them work out for you in ways you would have never thought of. So it's
Yeah.
always worked out.
And I guess, like, at least what I hear from UFT, it's quite challenging, especially the first year of university. That's when they really push you. How did you get through that process and the following years after?
So I'd say, in a nutshell, my university life was quite interesting in the sense that I started working full time almost, I think, 2 months in. My university experience wasn't exactly what people normally, I would say, go through because, for the most part, at least in those couple of years, I was working full time at one of the big four banks. What ended up happening was, as I'm working full time, you're trying to take classes in the evenings. It does have a challenge in that space. So the
Yeah.
first year, you may have some classes in the evenings, but then obviously things start to shift towards the day. A lot of my friends, a lot of my classmates would see me in school coming in to write the exams, and they'd be like, "Hey, we thought you dropped out." So it was, I would say, quite the experience.
Right.
So yeah.
And how is the organization? I know I could imagine it was extremely difficult, like doing a job as well as a full-time job at that, and
Mhm.
also studying. That must have been quite hard to juggle.
It was. You want to stretch yourself in life, you'd be surprised at how powerful, how strong you are. And that was, I would say, my experience as well. I've always wanted to be a person, something my dad taught me very young at age. He'd always say that don't waste time because if you do
Yeah.
that, one day time's going to waste you. So that was
Right.
always somewhere in the background, and it has stayed with me till today. So what I tend to do is I try and find ways to keep myself super busy. And again, it's not just about being busy. It's not about quantity. It's also always about quality. So at
Right.
that time, compared to all my other colleagues, my friends, I was doing quite well considering the role I had at the bank. At one point, I used to be one of the youngest branch managers
Oh
across
wow.
Canada. I was also one of the first ones to actually pilot a branch opening on a Sunday. This is
Yep.
again for one of the big four banks in
Right.
Mississauga. I would say quite the interesting experiences and definitely lots and lots of learning.
Yeah, I'm assuming it was quite nervous though, being like pretty young and doing all these like activities. Did you have a point where how did you overcome that? Okay, I can do this. Was it what was the moment that you felt was helpful?
I think the key here is in believing yourself. Anything and everything can be extremely complex and difficult and or very simple and
Yep.
straightforward. It just depends on the perspective you bring. If you walk into a situation with the intention to very sincerely approach it, to solve the problem or overcome the situation, and you want to do what's right, your guiding principles always need to be there with you. And one of the most important ones is always doing the right thing. As long as you're approaching things that way, even if you make a mistake, own it, learn from it, and basically move on.
Got you. And then once you graduated, what was the process after that? When looking for jobs, or did you go further education?
So when I finished working at the bank, this is when I was wrapping up my CMA. I ended up doing my certified management accountancy. Wanted to basically become a chartered accountant because back then you had those distinctions:
Right.
CPA, sorry, CA, CMA, CGA. CA was basically the goal. I wanted to be a public accountant. And interestingly enough, when school was wrapping up, it turns out that none of the big fours had any jobs for me. Mind you, at that time we were also going through that whole big bubble of, this was the subprime mortgages issue that happened in the
Oh my,
US.
yeah.
Jobs were very difficult to get. What ended up happening was my dad suggested, why don't you do your CMA? And then again, in my mind, I'm like, listen, you're kind of making me change the path. But like I said, listen to your parents. It does help. And not eagerly, but I ended up saying, okay, let me do that. And I think one important lesson you learn from that is that at any given point in time, yes, it's good to have aspirations and dreams and work towards them, but you always have to know when to draw the line as well. I have a colleague of mine, he's spent over 15 years to get a CPA. It's a great accomplishment,
Yep.
something I'm extremely happy for him. But I also feel that had he drawn the line a while ago and probably done something else, he probably would have fared better. You've got to know when to do that. I think timing is very important in life. So I ended up picking up the CMA and wrapped it up. Once that was done, I quit the banks and I started looking for a job back in the big four or within industry to try and gain some experience. And that became quite interesting for me because it's fairly young at the time. And the idea was, had a very good job at the bank. You leave all of that. You're looking for work. Work is difficult to find. And
Yep.
everybody who approached me was like, listen, you've worked in the banks. You've got to go back and you've got to proceed that way. And I was like, no, I will choose a different path and
Yeah.
I'm going to wait. And at that point in time, interestingly enough, my sister was getting married. So she's based out of the Middle East with my parents.
Yep.
I decided to take a 6-month break, move back to the Middle East with a little bit of an intention that I'll probably stay there and not come back for a couple of years. And generally in the Middle East, it's easier to find a job. You won't believe this, Azam. I spent 6 months. I think the soles of my shoes had basically worn off because of the amount of walking I did going office to office. And I didn't find anything. And it was quite demeaning. I would always joke with people that I'm getting globally rejected. I obviously came back and I started again, started fresh, started right from the bottom. And at that point in time, one of my other close friends who I was staying with, he was working through a recruitment company. So I remember contacting them in Mississauga. It was a different office altogether. And I said, listen, I've got this background. I'm looking for work. And they said, why don't you come down? So I show up and I had some issues with my luggage. So funny enough, I showed up in my jeans and shirt.
Yep.
And the interview happens. They obviously offer me a very good job at a bank. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to work at a bank. I want to still continue with the path I have in mind. Just find me an office where I can get my foot in the door. And they said, okay, as pathetic as this sounds, we'll get you started. And I think if I look back, that was probably like a $10 an hour job. The idea was to basically go in and do photocopies at a place. So this is, I would say, one of the major pharmaceutical companies we have here in Canada.
Yep.
But that is really what the role was. And they were all shocked. They were like, we don't know what you're doing. It doesn't make sense. Things don't add up here, but that's fine. That's what you want to do, by all means. I showed up on the Monday. One of the things they told me was, make sure you don't wear jeans. And I was like, yep, I'll take care of that. So I show up. And I would say the rest is history. I still remember walking in, the guy coming up to me, the person I was reporting to, and you're going to be doing photocopies. And I said, yep, I'm extremely excited. That's how we started day one. And before you knew it, by the evening, they gave me a computer and a desk and they wanted me to help out with their accounting stuff.
Gotcha.
And yeah.
Oh, wow. So I guess you first started and then from there you built it into the financial analyst role. So that's like a pretty big jump as well. And just proving yourself, just getting the foot in the door, I guess that's pretty good.
Yeah. Sometimes you've got to embrace and explore. You just don't know how things work out. And like I said, day one, they wanted me to help out with some emails. It was more like I started off a little bit on collections. Then I was doing journal entries. And before you knew it, I was helping them on the month-end cycle.
Right. And what was the transition? I know did you start in Blackberry later on, or was there like a process behind that as well?
If I recall correctly, I spent about 6 months over there. While I was there, I started looking for work. That again was quite challenging still because the job market was bad. More importantly, my experience was in banking. And then you've got this guy who's now trying to break into accounting. It was quite challenging. I'd say this is where the power of prayers or the power of dua comes in. I was quite, I would say, dejected at one point in time because you go through probably thousands of job applications. Nothing's quite working out for you. And I still remember I was home, I was washing the dishes, and I'm like, you know what, wait a minute. We've got the ability to make dua, and what am I exactly doing here? I called my mom and I said, listen, 2 weeks, you're going to see me having a couple of job offers and things are going to fall in place. And I think probably at that time she thought I had lost it. But this is what, again, I would say the power of faith does as well. I kept staying focused and kept applying. Honestly, within 4 weeks from that time, in fact, 2 weeks I had the job offers coming in, but by 4 weeks, I actually had a job offer from Maple Leaf Foods. I had one from Bell Canada. It was a great job. I had one from Blackberry. And I'm forgetting the fourth one. I think it was with Canada Bread or what it was. But anyways, it was part of the Loblaws group. The idea was four good jobs are there. And obviously BlackBerry was what my passion was. You'd be surprised back then, BlackBerry was the big thing. That was the smartphone. Right. And I was a big, I would say, ambassador of using BlackBerries. Funny enough, I would try and write emails to Mike and Jim in reference to them opening up an app store. I had very different ideas, wanted to be a bit of an entrepreneur, maybe even start my own startup. And that was the intention. But everybody would joke, you know what, you should work at BlackBerry. And funny enough, then I got the offer. I ended up started working there. And that's where the accounting experience really started.
And how was your experience at BlackBerry in terms of the first few months? Do you mind just going through your like the day-to-days that you were doing? I guess it was mostly like the month ends, or was there some other activities that you were doing?
Yeah,
Obviously, not revealing too much private information as well. So.
Again, BlackBerry was wonderful. It was a great organization to work at. I've never been at a place that had that kind of energy. Everybody was eager to work around the clock. We all wanted to be part of that success story. It was such a great place to work at. And I would say so blessed for that experience. I was part of a group that was responsible for financial reporting, obviously part of the month-end close-in process. So it was quite a lot of work with very senior leaders very early. But what was interesting there as well, and I probably share this, is that back in that time, I think it was 2010 to 2012, what was happening was we were not that dependent, especially in the finance function, on technology. And to share something with you, I still remember I joined. There was a couple of things that were part of my, I would say, job duties, and I'd work around the clock. It was just very intense. And at one point, I still remember my mother was visiting and my cousin was staying with me for a couple of days. So he actually complained. He's, listen, your son works round the clock. He'll probably fall dead this way. So this is how eager and dedicated we all were. And one of the things that really, I would say, opened doors for me and got me different experiences, got me more seniority within the organization was the ability to pick on tasks, which were especially mundane, and work on automating them. So I still remember we were doing something that literally had a team for maintenance. So it was worked on Excel, very manual. Did that for about 2 weeks. And I said, you know what, why am I like, I shouldn't say I'm wasting time, but it was like, this isn't exactly the best use of my or anybody else's time.
Yep.
So I sat down, built a macro, set up a lunch and learn. So this was something very new. They're like, this kid wants to do a lunch and learn. Never heard of it. Okay, bring your own lunch. What does this mean? And I show up, I do a presentation. I'm like, guys, I'm going to show you something cool. And in the next minute or so, you're going to see something that probably would take us 6 months, maybe a staff of 10, and you're going to be having it done in about a minute's time. Press a button, they see it happen on screen, and everybody was wowed. And I would say, again, this is where history is made. They were like, okay, wait a minute, this is absolutely amazing. Let's take this stuff away from you and let's put you onto things where we can actually use your mind. And that's how, again, doors started opening and it became a great learning experience.
Yeah, just stepping up in terms of your interest and I guess the fear as well, right? Being new, you don't want to do errors, all that stuff. Like, how did you get over that? And you just went for it. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, I always tell people to look at things as if they were looking at a coin. There's a 50% chance of success and a 50% chance of failure. And that applies to almost anything. The thought here is, yep, I could be wrong and I could fail. And I think failure, again, teaches you a lot more than winning does. Just for the fear of failure, if I don't do something, that would be wrong. And again, how I said earlier, that there is a guiding principle that says you must do what is right. In this instance, we could have saved the organization money, gotten them to be faster. All of those things were far more of a benefit than obviously the risk that I could be wrong and probably come across as a fool. But I thought, let's give it a shot and see how it goes. And funny enough, anytime and every time I've done that in life, it's always fared well for me, even if I failed, mind you.
Got you. And I guess once you completed your term in Blackberry, what was the process after that?
I probably could have stayed there. I had recently been promoted. I was doing well. And at that point in time, the only one thing that hit me, just because of the layoffs, we'd drive all the way to Waterloo every day from Mississauga, which is about 100 kilometers one way. We'd sometimes carpool. I even had a situation, I almost died in a car accident during wintertime going to work. Things happen, but again, like I said, super passionate, wanted to be there. I always wanted to connect with Mike and Jim. That never happened. I don't think they ever heard from me. But again, you have your dreams, you have your aspirations. And what kept me going, which is very important in life as well, Azam, is having a sense of purpose. But at that point in time, I felt especially that we were connecting people. And that was very important to me. That's why I wanted to do anything and everything to be there. But the one thing that really drove me to think otherwise was the fact that because of all the layoffs, I noticed that we weren't really quite doing anything new. I strongly felt that learning had stopped. I was very young at the time. The idea was, okay, if I'm not going to learn, I'm, again, not doing a service to Blackberry and I'm doing a disservice to myself as well. So I've got to start looking out. And that's basically when Mattel happened.
Okay. And was that an easy process or was it a little bit better because you had that experience with Blackberry? I think so. Hopefully the transition was a little easier or more flow, or was it actually challenging as well?
It was, again, quite interesting. Life comes full circle, as I say. Back in the years when I was about to move to Saudi, I had left the bank, wasn't quite finding anything. I had applied at Mattel. They had a co-op position. I went ahead, interviewed, had a multiple set of interviews, and eventually they decided to go with somebody else. Years later, when I'm at Blackberry, a recruiter reaches out to me and they're like, listen, there's a job at Mattel. Would you consider it? And then a couple months later, they stayed in touch. They reached out again and said, change your mind a bit, at least go and explore it. So do one interview, see how it goes. Frankly speaking, because I was so subscribed to the cause at Blackberry, at that point in time, I said, okay, let's give it a shot. Ended up at Mattel, went for the interview. Being at Blackberry and coming with that experience was definitely something that was quite helpful. Thankfully enough, I get the job. So I said, let's do it and let's move forward. Now, again, at Mattel, I needed to find my purpose. That was always the important piece. I did believe in this, and that's the reason why I ended up joining. But over the time that I spent there, this started hitting me even more. I always tell this to people, to my teams, this is what's going to bring magic. And the magic here was that the work we did was helping bring smiles to people's kids. And that was, again, something I really, truly subscribed to. It was very important to me. This is where I would say the hard work started coming in. I almost remember every week, Wednesdays or Thursdays, I'd probably be only the person at the office here in Canada, working till, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Wow. And all that effort and hard work you're putting in was for that reason. In fact, I remember sometimes people at work would be like, what's behind this work ethic? And I'd always tell them that, we're making people's kids happy. We're bringing smiles. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? And they'd all look at me thinking this guy has probably lost his mind. Funny enough, one of our more, I would say, most iconic leaders was stepping down. He was retiring and he does a global town hall. We were a team of about 300 plus people here in Canada at that time.
Yep.
And we all joined, I would say, the town hall. So he's talking to the global team. And he brings up this little gun he had from back in his days. This is in the 50s, and it was a Mattel toy. And he's, you know what, this gun still brings the smile it did when I was a little kid. And I want you all to know, each and every one of you, that the work you do brings smiles to people's kids. And the moment he says that, I still remember everybody in the office turned and looked at me and they're like, oh, this is the connection, right? This is how the guy thinks up top, and this is how this guy thinks. I think that sense of purpose is very important if you want to get things done in life.
Okay. And I guess when you got the designations, was it during Mattel, like the internal audit?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. So you just got that done.
Exactly. I had just wrapped up my CMA experience as well. This is at Mattel. So you know how it takes time to basically apply, show them. Exactly. I'm a big believer that you've got to continue educating yourself on a daily basis. This isn't something you kind of leave that because coming up in university days with the last minute deadlines and I would say the midterms and everything, you always think once school is done, I'm never going to look at a book. But I would say that's a very bad way to think. And I would say it's a childish way to think. Hopefully you grow up and you realize how important education is.
Right. So once you completed your time at Mattel, what was the next steps that you followed through?
Wherever you're working, always think 2 steps ahead in terms of what 2 organizations at least you'd be wanting to work at next. Right. So one of the organizations that was always on mind was PepsiCo. I would say a huge fan of Indra Nui, who was the CEO at the time. I eventually had interviews and I got the job. But funny enough, again, making that transition, the thing that hit me most, and it's interesting, even when I convinced myself, took the job, and I started the job for my first 2 or so months, what hit me was, so what are we exactly doing? And I truly felt that kept me from bringing in the magic, as I'd like to call it. What ended up happening was we again had a town hall, and these guys were speaking of the efforts PepsiCo was making in terms of building a sustainable world. I was able to firsthand see the amount of impact they made in communities they operated in. It was not just the jobs, but it was all the sustainability efforts, the way they were looking to feed the world in the upcoming years, especially with global warming and all the changes that are coming through, population growth and the other challenges countries face. When I saw that is when I realized that, hey, we're feeding people, and all of a sudden it's 360 in me. The person, Zohaib, changes all of a sudden, and now you see a different person altogether. As you were saying in my introduction, superheroes really inspire me. And I'll bring in that quote from Spider-Man: with great power comes great responsibility. That sort of, I would say, a moment dawned upon me. And it was a complete different change. Mind you, this is when I had pivoted as well. I wanted to take that risk. Earlier on, you asked a question, what if you fail, or what if you make a wrong decision? And I always tell people that, as provided it's a decision that's not going to have a detrimental impact to anybody's well-being, one should always take it. Take your chances. You'll be surprised.
Okay. And would this be considered like a financial analyst role, or was it like a completely different role altogether?
Very different role. And I had multiple titles for it. You can call it strategy manager. You're basically working with all your senior leaders. And your mandate is really 2 things. Your mandate is on the technology. And then what was interesting was I was also the person who was responsible now from a strategic standpoint, the decision making we're doing, again, working with the multiple leaders. And really what that taught me, that role, was how you need to work to drive an agenda, how you need to make your executive presence felt, build allies or build your relationship, your network, and more importantly, how you basically influence others, which are, I would say, very important things. It's one thing to think something and maybe you're thinking the greatest idea, but it's really another to bring it into fruition. And I think that's a challenge that we all face.
And I guess once you completed your time at PepsiCo, you went into Deloitte, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That is right.
So I guess like the transition to the AI area, like how did that go about, and how did you get the first exposure to that?
I'll maybe just take one step back. See, at PepsiCo, like I said, started on the strategy side. What we then did was we pioneered a new team. This was now focused on revenue management. Again, coming from the finance world, you as well as them. Growing up, we study and focus a lot on the costing side of things. Cost management, CMA, I would say, is primarily based on that piece. But in today's day and age, what you really need is revenue management. You need ways to really grow your revenue. You need ways to grow the top line. Right. And this is what revenue management is all about. Now, when we did that, my focus was on the data side of things. My focus was on the strategy side of things, and it was on the technology. This is where data science and everything started kicking in. I did this back at Mattel as well, back in the day when I think data scientists didn't even exist. Numbers were something that always intrigued. I can probably look at numbers all day. And data was something that was also very, I would say, very key and crucial. I move over to Mattel, I use data, and I'm able to make some great business decisions. So that kind of worked out. And then as I keep thinking about data, numbers, and so forth, at PepsiCo, the same was applying. That's when, again, a recruiter reaches out to me and says, I'm sending you a role. I thought, okay, let me go down. experience the organization, experience, I would say, the discussions and see what it's all about. And we'll make a decision after that. And frankly speaking, went in, the vibe, the environment, the people, it was all so good that it really started forcing me to think that Deloitte, I could see a very different future. Now, again, I would say totally different to what I was doing at PepsiCo. But again, this is where risk equals return, or the learning aspect.
Yeah, like obviously, like, the AI push that's happened in the last few months, even not a full year, my understanding, you were involved in this area before even the hype started beginning. So that's pretty, I guess it's like the perfect timing in a way.
I always say this, everything and anything that has happened in life that has been good has been because of obviously the Almighty. So He's truly blessed me. I'm also very lucky to have very good parents whose prayers are definitely something that have played a huge part in my life. My mom especially is outstanding. She has been, I would say, my career mentor and somebody I go to for advice on a day-to-day basis. I do pick her mind quite a bit, and she's been very helpful. And then I've been very lucky to have really great mentors throughout my career who have been very impactful, some very good friends, and obviously I would say lots of prayers and support from them as well. So that's been quite helpful. But one thing that really also helps on top of all of these things, and I highly encourage people to do that, is basically doing your research. What's been very helpful, I would say, in my life, in addition to all of these things, these are obviously, I would say, the fundamentals, the foundation. But then what tends to happen is, again, with the Almighty's help, what I would always do is, and I still do this, is I try and read a lot. The key here is do as much reading as you can, and especially reading scholarly papers from the Harvard Business Review or papers from Deloitte, for example. What's going to end up happening is when you do that kind of reading, you're going to start formulating a point of view. So it's very important to start thinking about trends and situations that will basically present themselves in the upcoming years. Right. And if you can start building a worldview with that kind of knowledge, what you can then start doing is you can start betting on things that you think from your heart, which you would believe in, which you'd stand for, which you could take a bullet for. And if you find something like that, what you then need to then do next is focus on preparing to position yourself for success. So I'll give an example. Like I said, years ago when data science was not even a thing, I'm working with numbers, I'm working with statistics, I'm working with data, which is exactly what data science is. It's all statistics, it's all statistical models. None of this stuff is brand new. This is stuff we've had for ages, for decades. But the trouble was we didn't quite apply this within our working lives. I remember there was this one time we were working through some stuff and I brought in a Pareto analysis. I'm sure you've studied this back in high school, you've studied this in your CP education. And funny enough, there were CPAs around me and they're all looking at me as if I just devised some new technology or some new terminology, which they had never heard of. And I became, you could say, a superstar. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, what is wrong with people? So what you learn is that what most people did was when they went to school, they aimed to succeed in exams and not really the learning. And because they aimed to succeed in exams, they probably got A pluses. But as soon as that exam was done, all of that learning went away. Because it wasn't really learned to be applied, but rather learned to go and succeed in an exam. Obviously,
that's so true.
Right? They're good with their goals, but they never kept up with it. And honestly, to this day, if you go back and ask me first year or give me a topic, I can pretty much go back and say first year, this book within this chapter. I won't know the chapter number, but I'll know which book to go and refer to. And this is where you could probably find the concept. And that's important because honestly, if you start applying what you've learned, even 10% of it, it brings about a huge difference in your life. But like I said, very important to do your readings. I started betting on data science, and thankfully that worked out. The next one was betting on cloud. I don't think it would have taken off the way it did, but the pandemic happens. Everything was forced onto the cloud. Again, I would say this is where I got lucky. The prayers worked, and I was at the forefront, and things worked out really well. I'm now betting on some other things, which I think will be quite powerful in the coming years. And again, how do I do that? It's the reading. It's the discussions you have with people. It's all the knowledge that you try and gather, and then the things that you can connect with and feel strongly about, and then you go after them. And you go after them by taking education, by trying and gaining experience, maybe a pro bono project, whatever. And that is what's going to then end up opening doors and help you position yourself as the best person when the time comes.
Got you. And how is the day-to-day like for your current role? Like, how is it like in terms of the week, the month? Like, how is the experience in terms of what you're doing on a daily basis?
Azam, think of it this way. Like I said, purpose is very important. So I always tell people, Deloitte, we solve world problems and we do that one day at a time. Again, extremely privileged and humbled with the way things have worked out in life. All of the organizations that I've worked at, thankfully, have been iconic, including this one as well. I'd say it's very fast-paced. We work with cutting-edge stuff. What's nice is because you work on various different projects, different things, the ability to learn is just immense. It's beautiful. It's something I'd never experienced, and honestly, it's never enough in terms of learning. There's just always something new, something happening, something you can get involved in. So frankly, 24 hours are less. I'm trying to find ways to add more time. And it's truly been an experience.
Okay, and how would you say in terms of building the relationship in this industry, what's your thoughts on people or people who are interested in this? How can they get in this specific industry?
I'd say a couple of things. Obviously, it goes back to the reading, goes back to the education component. Now,
Yep.
I will say education is transforming, and I shouldn't use the word transforming. I think the world truly is at an intersection where they're now starting to experience disruptions. You wake up in the morning and the world has now completely changed. So what I'd highly recommend is be smart with your time. Your time is of essence. There's a very famous saying from Warren Buffett. He basically says that the difference between the successful and the not so successful is that the very successful will basically say no to everything. And now that doesn't mean that they don't do anything. What it basically means is they're very strategic in nature with their decisions in terms of what they're picking and doing. So the same applies here as well. I would say the AI space is going to grow. Definitely. There's lots and lots of work to do. Again, I heard a very interesting quote from, I believe it was the founder of OpenAI. And please forgive me if I'm quoting this or misquoting this. But it went along the lines that AI is not going to replace jobs, but AI will take away jobs from people who don't know how to use AI. So if you can start incorporating and thinking along those lines, whatever role you're doing, if you can start thinking how technology can be combined, I think you're going to be in the game. You're going to do really well. My thoughts are focus on the readings, focus on the education component, but education that you can actually apply. There's a big gap between what is being produced from universities today as we speak versus what is actually needed in the job market. I find there's a lot of people doing lots of good master's programs and so forth, and they're great. Don't get me wrong. They make you very strong conceptually, but you may not be the exact person to come out and actually apply those learnings because they're very conceptual in nature. They're basically, in my opinion, humble opinion, they're building more professors than actually professionals. And we need professionals who can actually come in, get the job done. Another last thing I'm also going to say is that you may want to focus on becoming a purple person. Not sure if you've heard of this term before, Azam.
No, it's the first time.
Okay, so this is a Deloitte term, I would say terminology. What we always tell people is that, see, there's two types of people. There's people who are red and there's people who are blue. The red people are people who are technical in nature, your computer scientists, your software engineers, and so forth. And your blue people are basically people who are more business oriented. So your accountants and your marketers and so forth. The combination of the two is basically a purple person. And the idea is if you become that unicorn, if you become that purple techno function leader, which is what I personally aspire to be as well, you become a unicorn. You become somebody who's highly sought after and somebody I think who's really going to bring about an impact. And that's actually something that we stand behind or rather believe in and try and do with our actions at Deloitte as well, which is creating impact. So trying and doing things that make this world a better place. And I think if you start combining those two types of things, you could do that within the roles that you're doing as well.
Awesome. Thanks. So before we move on to like the general discussion of AI and the future for that, I'm really curious, like your LinkedIn profile, it is like an animated version of yourself and it's pretty accurate. So do you use like Midjourney? What was the software you used for that?
You know, this is a good question. The app that I use is called Lensa. Lensa. Okay. Yes.
It's really cool. I guess for our audio listeners, currently he has a very accurate image. It's like animatedly generated on his LinkedIn profile. It's really cool. But yeah, what's your thoughts in terms of the development? Like, where do you see this future in terms of disruption in different industries? Where are you seeing more of it? Or what's your thoughts just in general, whatever you want to share?
See, I'd say a couple of things. One, I tend to have a bit of a P&L view. So this is again something I was taught by one of my mentors at Blackberry. He happened to be from Pakistan as well. Great guy. I owe a lot to him. He would always tell me, when you look at things, look at it from a P&L standpoint. I was young at that time, never made sense. But growing up, it starts connecting. So one of the things I tell people is that as you look at things from a P&L standpoint, I'll give you an example. I'm going to look at things from a perspective of revenues, from a perspective standpoint of cost, and then obviously what their bottom line looks like. And now that you have AI technology, because AI, artificial intelligence, all it's really doing is it's basically finding ways to do things in an easier way. And I'd say we need that in any given situation. But what that's also translating into is a lot of time savings and huge cost savings. And obviously, that is something I would say it's the need of the hour. If you look at the economic conditions, every organization is looking at that. So now when you give this P&L view, start thinking where and how you could incorporate the technology and impact their top line, their bottom line, what sort of things could apply. And I think that could be an area of focus for people as they start looking at things, because you could be a marketer and you could use this technology very effectively. You could be an accountant, same thing. You could be in any space and you could benefit. The other thing I'd say is there's going to be a lot of bad that's going to come out of this as well. And I say that. Why? Because as always, I'll give an example. We brought in smartphones. They connected the world. You have everything at your fingertips, but then note how everybody's on their smartphones now. I think you've really impacted the social fabric, the structures we used to have within families and friends and how people communicated. I often find that people are much better communicating on a WhatsApp group than they are in person. It's, again, I'm not sure how to put it, but it's really the challenge of our times. So there's that, I would say, the two sides. There's a good side and there's obviously a bad side. So the same thing would apply with AI. There's going to be a bad side. And I think we need a lot of people to come and kind of police that for us, ethical people who find ways to work in that space. And I think that will be a growing space in the upcoming time. And then what I'd also say lastly is that there's going to be a lot of good. But what's changed is when I was in high school here, Azam, we had a class called careers back in grade 10. I'm sure you took that as well.
Yeah,
right?
that's yeah.
And what they taught us then was that our parents, they spent all their lives doing one career. And that worked out for them. In your time, you're going to do 3 to 5 careers. And oh boy, they were so right how things have changed. So I would say the same applies to all of us now, even more. I used to previously always ask people, any organization you join, what C-level role do you want to be? And that's how your decisions should be based on a day-to-day basis. Because if I want to be a CMO, then obviously I want to do things within the marketing function or with that sort of an orientation. Versus if I want to be a CFO, what has changed now is I still tell people to do the same, but the difference is start having I would say, a vision of about a year to a maximum 3 years. And why I say that is because 3 years is hard to predict in today's time and age with the way things are going. But the next 12 months, yes, you could land in the right spot, the right space. As you do your research, this is for everybody listening, as you do your research, as you try and pick on what that next big thing would be, where can I see myself being utilized the most? Try and pick something with that 12 to 16-month timeline. And frankly speaking, I think in the future, what you're going to see is everybody is going to be a problem solver. Right. That is really where we're headed to. I would say if we start having that kind of a mindset, that kind of a mentality, it will truly have an impact.
Yeah, I think so. Like just building on the problem solving, like obviously we didn't develop when we grew up with ChatGPT, but the students now are using it significantly. So it's going to be interesting to see how that generation gets into the workforce, because they'll be like, okay, there has to be a faster way, and they're probably going to include more efficiencies in their jobs. So it's definitely different.
If I can put it this way, I'll say I'm all for the faster way. What I'm not all for is the way, unfortunately, things then end up becoming used. And I'll give an example of that. So I used to be a part of a team that would manage Bring Your Kids to Work Day. This is something that happens in November, happens in Canada annually. I don't know if you went with your dad to work, but again, growing up, fond memories. Interestingly enough, I had a first set of kids, and just imagine how quickly they changed. My first set of kids comes in, great kids, interacted well with us, had a phenomenal time. So it was an experience. I loved it, they loved it, and it was a good place to be in. The following year, just imagine in 12 months, okay, the following year, these kids come in, okay, and one of them actually had an iPod. So back then we didn't have iPhones, but we did have iPhones, but kids had iPods, not like today. And obviously these are grade 9 kids. So one of them had an iPod. The rest of them were pretty engaged. This one guy was pretty busy with his iPod. I found it a bit strange, but whatever. The following year, I still remember this. We had a group of kids come in, probably our largest cohort. And everybody's running around. And I remember I used to set up the program with our teams, with the different leaders. The plan was bring them in, different leaders go and talk to them. We give them a bit of a walk at the factory and all the other things. We have a good day with them. So it's an exciting place to be in for these kids, hopefully one that's inspiring as well. Funny enough, it's like 11 a.m. All the leaders have gone in and spoken to them. And they are frowning, they're running around, they just can't connect with the group. So they call me in. Our leader at the time calls me in and he's, listen, we've all struggled. We are literally in panic mode. And we don't know what to do. So you're the youngest. Why don't you go talk to them? And I said, what happened? I'm a bit surprised. I'm like, these are kids. Like, why are you guys sweating? Everybody's in a weird shape. And they're like, these kids don't interact. So I said, okay, that's strange. I said, okay, no issues. I speak to a lot of people. I'll go talk to them. These are kids. These are our kids. Like, what's wrong? So I walk into the room. Imagine there's 10, 15 kids. And probably one of my most difficult conversations ever, because they would not look up to you. They were all busy with their phones. They were talking to each other, probably made a WhatsApp group or whatever. So look at how your communication styles changed within, 2 years? So when you say that ChatGPT is there and people are going to use it, what I fear for is that they're going to become, instead of becoming smarter, we're going to become prompters.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned less, I guess the problem solving will be reduced as well, most likely.
Absolutely.
But it could help a little bit, but I guess certain people have their mindset correct for using the systems.
I think this is where things will get impacted. And I really hope that people pick this for the right reasons. The right reasons, this is amazing. I'm not sure if you've recently heard, Google's going to leverage technology, look through your eye, and they can start diagnosing things. They can tell a lot about your body without you even being pricked by a needle, which I think is powerful. It's important. This is the stuff we need. But then you have kids, like you mentioned, who are using ChatGPT to basically do their homework. How is that exactly a good thing? And it's not more so on ChatGPT. The technology is good. This is more so on the kids. So you have to be smart enough to know that having that sort of dependency on these things is not going to help.
Got it. Awesome. I know you mentioned a lot of things, being able to have that 12-month time frame, being able to just take risks. Do you have any other recommendations for Pakistani professionals that are either moving to Canada as a professional or joining in middle school or university, like a general advice you would like to give?
you've got a couple of things that you should focus on. And I would say this is for people starting school, whether it's middle school, university. This is for people working. Never be fearful of exploring different things, of challenging the status quo. I'd say have a strong set of guiding principles that would include the fact that you should always be doing what's right, principles that will push you towards learning, very important, and also principles of failing fast. Failure is not a bad thing at all. Embrace it, endorse it, be proud of your failures. I show them as your badge of honors, because honestly, they are what help you, become who you are. So those are, I would say, very important things. And I'd also say lastly, focus very much on having the right work ethic. I always tell people to contrast yourselves with the different athletes we have. I'd start, since we're Pakistani, we should probably bring in Imran Khan in the conversation. I would say, I don't know if you've heard of this, Azam. Have you heard of his Corner Tigers piece? There you go.
Who hasn't heard of it?
That's it. So I would say, take yourself as a corner tiger. You'll be surprised at the kind of results you're going to see. I'm a huge fan of the man, and he's done so much for us. Definitely, that's something that I think one should be getting inspired with. He brought us the World Cup, obviously, with the team. But the idea is, it's that mindset, it's that mentality, which makes the biggest difference. Having, I would say, a tough mental mindset is extremely important. The other thing I'll say is, if you look at the basketball players here, people like Michael Jordan, people like LeBron James. I'm a huge fan of Kobe Bryant, his Mamba mentality. So again, if you don't know what that is, definitely research. I think when you bring that kind of a mindset to anything you do, you're going to do magic. So it's very important you do that. The last thing I'm also going to say is, whether again you're in school or you're working, build your network. Meet people, do coffees. You'd be surprised at the doors they'll open. You'd be surprised at the way things change in your life. There was a colleague of mine back at PepsiCo, and we were doing a training. He'd been with Pepsi a number of years. He used to work with me, but from a separate team. He was now joining the team. So I gave him a training, spent an hour, 2 hours together. We're walking out of the room, and I had heard this comment my entire life. Why don't you become a consultant? You'd do so amazing. And that day, this guy says this to me, and I had never paid attention to this, but I hear it from him. And that evening, I spent applying at the consulting firms. It's interesting how that person's words changed my life without him even knowing this today. So this is why I always tell people that when you meet people, you learn so much. And sometimes be strategic with your coffees. You want to join Deloitte, maybe you meet with a lot more Deloitte people. But let's say if it's not even a person from Deloitte, this is maybe somebody who works at a circus, probably not something of interest, still go and connect with them, learn about their life, their decisions, why they do what they do. And you'd be surprised at you walking away and still getting inspired and learning something new. So make sure you build that network, tap that network when it comes to, finding opportunities. And you'd be surprised, in fact, at how many things will come because of that network as well.
Exactly. And I guess the very last question here, we ask all the guests, like, how do you define success? What's your version of success in terms of just in general?
Very powerful questions, Azam. And I'm so happy because you're truly trying to inspire people in a very big way. So thank you very much for doing that. I'd say success really defines as number one, doing the right thing, but doing something that actually has an impact. What I really strive for, and this is something I live by principally, is that hopefully when I leave this world, I leave it a better place. Being someone who is in service to others is extremely important. To me, that is again success. And I always tell people, concept of servant leadership as an example. Mentoring, coaching, teaching, doing whatever you can, whether it's your time, it's your money, anything that you can do to help others is basically what success is. And frankly, that's what I have experienced in my life. That's what's brought me here. Obviously, this wasn't, I would say, a one-man show. It never was. And I would say that is what's going to contribute in your journey as well. So the idea for success really then is, being in service, doing the right thing, and always trying to impact people or the world in, I would say, the most positive or the most beneficial way.
Thank you, Zohaib. Thank you for your time. Honestly, that was the entire speech. It's so relatable and inspirational, even from like where I am at right now. It really excites me just listening to you speak. But honestly, no, thank you so much for your time. It's like great speaking with you. And,
thank you very much again, Azam. It was definitely a pleasure. I really hope that what you aspire to do, which is inspiring people, is I'm sure you'll be able to do. And I really hope that people find this useful. And you're definitely setting out to be an example. One should lead by example, as they say. So you're doing all the right things. And I'm so glad we were able to connect, and I had the opportunity of having this discussion with you this morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.